I didn't find an empty house. I found something so much worse, and for weeks afterward I kept wishing I had come home one day later just so I wouldn't have had to know. But then I understood. If I had, she wouldn't have survived to tell me herself. Most betrayals announce themselves. They come with a scene, raised voices, something broken. This one had been operating in total silence for 4 months, wearing the face of someone I loved, moving through my home every single morning while I was at work. And the only reason I found out at all was a canceled conference, a last-minute flight, and the specific, inexplicable feeling I get in my chest when something in my world is wrong before I can name why. Welcome to Dad's True Emotions. What I'm about to tell you is the most difficult story I have ever put into words. Stay with me. Let me tell you something about 26 years of marriage first, because nothing that follows makes sense without it. After that long with another person, sharing a mortgage, a kitchen, every version of yourself you've cycled through across 3 decades, you stop having to think about them consciously. They become part of your operating system. You know the sound of their footsteps and what those footsteps mean. You know the difference between the laugh they use in public and the one that escapes when something genuinely catches them off guard. You know when something is wrong before a single word has been spoken, the way you know a storm is coming before the clouds arrive, something in the pressure, something in the air. My wife's name is Renata. She is, without question, the most alive person I have ever known. She fills rooms. She fills silences. She fills our house with commentary and laughter and the kind of warm, running narration that used to drive me mildly crazy in my 30s and that I now understand was actually the sound of a life being fully, unapologetically lived. She talks to the plants. She has opinions about the neighbors' landscaping choices. She once spent 40 minutes having what could only be described as a philosophical argument with our refrigerator when the ice maker stopped working. And I want you to know she felt she made several compelling points. So when I turned onto our street that Tuesday afternoon and felt it, that specific wrongness, that pressure shift that lives in the chest before the brain catches up, I knew. I didn't know what, but I knew. I wasn't supposed to be home. A regional sales conference in Charlotte had wrapped a full day ahead of schedule. The keynote presenter had a family emergency, or possibly just looked out at 300 people in conference lanyards and reconsidered his life choices. Either way, I was on the first flight back without telling anyone. No call to Renata. No text. I figured I'd pick up the pho from that place she loves and actually sit across from my wife at dinner for once without a spreadsheet open somewhere between us. I was feeling light. I was feeling the particular good mood of a man heading home unexpectedly and imagining the look on his wife's face. I should have known that specific feeling is the universe's setup for something else entirely. The first thing I noticed when I pulled into the driveway was my son Derek's car. Derek is 28. He has a good job, a condo across town that I helped him furnish when he first moved in, and a wife named Amber who I had tried, genuinely, consistently tried to like from the beginning. They don't do drop-in visits. Derek barely does scheduled ones. So seeing his car parked in my driveway on a random Tuesday afternoon wasn't just unusual. It was the kind of wrong that makes you sit in your own car for a moment, staring at it, asking nobody in particular, "Why is that there?" I grabbed my carry-on and walked to the front door. The second thing I noticed was the silence. Not peaceful silence, not the comfortable silence of a house where everyone is simply occupied. The thick, weighted, directional silence of a space where people are waiting for something. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Derek and Amber were sitting in my living room, together, on the couch, not watching anything, not on their phones, just sitting in the particular posture of two people who have already processed the news and are now simply waiting for the person who hasn't received it yet. Derek looked up when I came through the door. He was not surprised to see me. "I need you to sit with that for a moment. Your father, who is supposed to be 4 hours away at a conference, walks through his own front door a full day early, and you don't flinch. No double take, no dad, what are you doing here? Nothing. Just a slow blink and an expression I can only describe as someone doing a very fast internal calculation. Amber smiled. And that smile, I have thought about that smile many times since, had absolutely no business being on anyone's face at that moment. I said, "Derek, what's going on? Where's your mother?" He cleared his throat. He said, "Dad, hey, we were actually about to call you." "Were you?" I said, not a question. "Mom had an episode this morning." He paused. "She's at Memorial, but she's stable." I did not hear anything after *Memorial. I was back in my car in under 30 seconds. I know this because I counted. Shock does that to you, makes your brain latch onto the most useless concrete details while the important ones try to break you apart from the inside. Memorial Hospital is 14 minutes from my house under normal conditions. I made it in 8. I will not be answering questions about that. My closest friend Raymond had called me on the way. 32 years of friendship. The man has been with me through job losses and a health scare in my 40s, and the genuinely catastrophic experience of watching me attempt home renovation in 2015. There is not a conversation I have had in 3 decades that Raymond hasn't eventually been part of, and he has never once softened a truth just because it would have been easier. He picked up on the first ring. I said, "Renata is in the hospital. Memorial. I just got home and Derek and Amber were sitting in my living room like 2 people waiting for the end of a movie they'd already seen." Silence. Then, "What do you mean like they already knew?" "Ray, my son didn't even react when I walked through the door. I was supposed to be in Charlotte." A longer pause, then very quietly, "James, I need you to stay calm." "I am calm." "You're driving 90 on a residential street, that's a different thing." He wasn't wrong. Just get there, and James, pay attention to everything, everything. Dr. Simone Acaffer met me at the nurse's station. She was a steady woman, precise in her movements and her language, the kind of physician who understands that families in waiting rooms need clarity more than they need comfort. I appreciated that immediately. She said, "Mr. Hargrove, I'm glad you're here. Your wife was brought in this morning by your son. She presented with severe disorientation, neurological symptoms, and we found some elevated markers in her blood work that we're investigating further." "What kind of markers?" She looked at me steadily. "Toxicity markers. We're running a full panel, but I want to be transparent with you. The pattern we're seeing isn't consistent with a sudden illness. The presentation suggests something cumulative, something that has been building over time." That word landed like a stone dropped from a height. "Building," I said very carefully, gripping the edge of the nurse's station. "Dr. Acaffer, are you telling me that someone has been doing something to my wife?" She held my gaze and said, "I'm telling you that I have questions, and I think you need to have them too." I went in to see Renata. I have been beside this woman through everything. I have seen her joyful and exhausted and furious and heartbroken. I have seen her in the middle of the night with the flu, insisting she was fine while clearly not being fine. I have seen every version of her that 26 years produces. I thought I was prepared for anything. I was not prepared for this. She looked hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and turned down a dial slowly, carefully, over months, until the version of her lying in that bed was only a partial translation of the woman I knew. The monitors beeped steadily. The IV dripped. And Renata, who once stood in our kitchen and told a plumber who did careless work exactly where he and his invoice could go, with vocabulary I didn't know she had, lay there looking impossibly diminished. I sat beside her. I took her hand, and I made her a promise in the way I only make promises when I mean them with everything I have. I told her I was there. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. I told her I was going to find out exactly what had happened to her. Then I walked back out to the waiting area. Derek and Amber had arrived. Of course they had. Derek stood up immediately when he saw me, and there was something practiced about the movement, something that had been rehearsed in the car on the way over. He said, "Dad, there's a lot you don't know. We should talk." I held up one hand, just one, and something in my face communicated the precise information it needed to communicate because he stopped mid-sentence. I said, "Not yet." I walked to the corner of the waiting room, took out my phone, and started doing something they were not expecting. Methodically, account by account, I began locking down every financial access point that Derek had ever been given. Every one. Within 4 minutes, Amber's phone lit up in her lap. I watched that smile she'd been carrying all afternoon leave her face like a light being switched off. And in that moment, watching her expression change when the notifications hit, I understood something with complete, cold clarity. Whatever was happening to my wife, I had just touched the edge of it. Before I go further, if this story is reaching you, please take a second to subscribe to Dad's True Emotions and leave a comment below. It's the community that keeps these stories alive, and I mean that genuinely. Now let me keep going, because you need to hear what came next. Here is something I have learned about denial over the course of my life. Denial is not a lack of information. Denial is a choice. It is comfortable and it is warm, and it will pour you a cup of coffee and tell you that the things your instincts are screaming at you about are simply your imagination, that you are being unfair, that the people who love you are incapable of the thing your gut knows they've done. I had been choosing denial for longer than I was willing to admit. Because here is what I knew, sitting in that hospital parking lot at 10 o'clock at night with my wife connected to machines 30 feet above me. 4 months ago, Renata had twisted her ankle on the back stairs, nothing serious. A bad sprain, 3 or 4 weeks of taking it easy. Derek had been attentive in a way that, at the time, I had found genuinely moving. He suggested that Amber, who worked part-time with a flexible schedule, could come by the house each morning to help Renata with breakfast and her medications while I was at work. I had been touched by that. I had told Raymond about it. I said, maybe I've been too hard on that boy. I sat in that parking lot and I thought about Amber in our kitchen, every morning for 4 months, making my wife's breakfast, handling her supplements. I called Raymond. He picked up before the first ring finished. I said, the doctor used the word toxicity, said it's been building, not sudden. Raymond exhaled slowly. Then, James, gradual means deliberate. I know what it means. And Derek and Amber were in the house, every morning. The silence between us had weight to it. Then Raymond said, and I will remember these words for the rest of my life, brother, I need you to think very carefully about who had access to what Renata was eating, drinking, and taking every single day for the last 4 months. I went back inside. Derek was standing near the vending machines with his arms crossed in the posture of a man working hard to appear casual and failing at it completely. Amber was seated with her phone face down on her lap. I want you to understand what that meant. Amber is never without her phone. I once watched her scroll through it during a family Thanksgiving prayer. A face-down phone from Amber meant either she was waiting for a call she didn't want me to see, or she had already received one. I sat across from them. I said, Derek, walk me through what's been happening. He shifted in his seat. He said, Mom has been having health issues for a while. We were worried. Lindsay, Amber, was coming by every morning to make sure she was eating, taking her vitamins. I said, her vitamins. Yes. Which ones? He blinked. What? Your mother takes 4 different supplements. Which ones was Amber giving her? What time, with what? He looked at Amber. Amber looked at her lap. That 3-second exchange told me everything. I stood up. I said his name once quietly, the way my own father used to say mine in the moments when the next thing I did was going to determine something permanent about who I was. I said, Derek, go home. He started to say something. I said, go home. They left. I sat back down in that plastic waiting room chair with a cup of coffee I had stopped tasting an hour ago, and I did the thing that frightened me most. I opened 6 months of bank statements on my phone. I am not a financial analyst. I am a 57-year-old man who considers online banking a necessary inconvenience, but even I could see the shape of what had been happening. Small withdrawals, $180 here, $320 there, $250 the following week. The kind of amounts that don't alarm anyone individually. The kind that whisper instead of shout. Added together across 5 months, they came to just over $14,000. From a joint account that Renata and I shared, to which Derek had limited emergency access. $14,000. I called Raymond at 2 in the morning. He answered like it was afternoon. I said $14,000, 5 months, small withdrawals, consistent. He was quiet. Then, James, that's not impulsive. That's someone who thought it through. That's someone who sat down and planned how to do this without triggering any alerts. The 2 words I said next nearly broke me right there in that waiting room. My son, I said, and my voice did something on those 2 words that I am not going to describe in detail because some things don't need to be described. They just need to be known. Raymond said, "We don't know everything yet." I said, "Ray, I know." He said softly, "I know you do." The next morning, Dr. Ackefer found me exactly where she'd left me. She sat down beside me, which physicians rarely do, and I noticed it. She said, "Mr. Hargrove." The full panel came back. I said, "Tell me straight." Your wife has elevated concentrations of a compound consistent with prolonged ingestion of a specific heavy metal. The levels indicate consistent exposure over a period of several months. Her liver and kidneys are under significant stress. We've begun targeted treatment. She paused. We caught this. She has a strong path to recovery, but I want to be clear with you about what we're looking at. I said, if someone were doing this deliberately, how would they administer it? She looked at me carefully. Then, it could be introduced through food, through beverages, through powder-based supplements that dissolve completely and have no distinct taste. Derek's voice was in my head immediately. Amber was coming by every morning to make sure she took her vitamins. I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped the floor. Dr. Ackefer put a hand on my arm. I said, "I need to make a phone call." I called my attorney, a woman named Gloria Ashworth who has been practicing law for 28 years and who I have always suspected genuinely enjoys watching the wrong people face the right consequences. I told her everything, every piece of it. The withdrawals, the supplements, the daily access, the toxicology report, the timing. She was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. Then she said, "James, do not touch anything in that house. Do not confront either of them. Do not post, say, hint, or signal anything to anyone outside of this conversation." "Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good, because when I'm done building this, there will not be a single exit." I said, "Gloria, I want them to feel every inch of what they've done." She said, "By the time I'm finished, they'll feel the square footage." I almost smiled, almost. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. Renata was improving, slowly, cautiously, but unmistakably. The treatment was working. Her numbers were stabilizing. And on the second afternoon, she opened her eyes and found me sitting beside her and said, in the most exhausted and yet completely recognizable version of her voice, "James, you look absolutely awful." I laughed. An actual laugh out loud in the ICU. The nurse looked at me with the expression of someone reconsidering whether to call someone. Maybe she was right to. But hearing Renata's specific, loving, completely merciless assessment of my appearance, that voice, that cadence, that irreplaceable brand of affection disguised as criticism, felt like something being switched back on inside my chest. I leaned forward and said, "You're hooked up to machines and you're giving me feedback on my appearance." She said, weakly but with complete precision, "Somebody has to maintain standards around here." I held her hand, and I did not let go for a very long time. I didn't tell her everything. She needed to heal first and the full truth could wait, but I told her she was safe. I told her I knew what had happened. I told her it was being handled. She looked at me with those sharp, clear eyes of hers, the ones that have always seen through me more completely than I was entirely comfortable with, and she said, "It was Derek, wasn't it?" Not a question. I didn't answer, I just held her hand tighter. She closed her eyes. She said quietly, "I always knew that boy had my stubbornness and none of my conscience." Even then, Renata was the most formidable person I had ever known. On the fourth day, Gloria called. Raymond, God bless that man, had quietly obtained surveillance records from a pharmacy in a neighboring town. Derek had visited that pharmacy on 4 separate occasions over 5 months, always in cash, always alone, except once. On the third visit, the exterior camera had captured Amber waiting in the car. The supplement he had purchased on each occasion contained trace amounts of a compound that, administered consistently in elevated doses through food or drink over an extended period, produced precisely the toxicity profile Dr. Acaffer had found in Renata's bloodwork. Gloria also had the bank records reconstructed with full transaction detail. She had the estate attorney's records because Renata, 6 weeks before her collapse, had visited an estate planner alone and without telling me. She was updating her life insurance policy. The original document had listed Derek as a secondary beneficiary, something we'd established years ago, standard and unconsidered. What Renata had gone to do, quietly and entirely like herself, was redirect that policy to a charitable literacy foundation she had been building for 2 years. She wanted to present it to me as a fully functioning thing before she said a word about it. Never half measures with Renata. The policy was worth $1.9 million. Derek had found out. We don't know the exact mechanism, but he had found out that his mother was about to remove him from $1.9 million and redirect it towards something that had nothing to do with him. And rather than picking up a phone and having a conversation like an adult, he and Amber had sat down together and decided that the most practical solution was to make sure Renata didn't survive long enough to complete the paperwork. The estate attorney had a 30-day processing window on the policy change. Renata had 30 days left when she collapsed. 30 days. I sat with that number for a long time. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat in that plastic chair and let the full weight of it press down on my chest until it became part of me. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked to the window. I called Gloria. I gave her everything she needed. She filed within the hour. And then, because this is the thing that still makes Raymond laugh despite everything, we discovered that Derek, during the period of this months-long, carefully calculated operation, had called the estate attorney's office, posing as Renata's personal assistant, on his own cell phone, to ask about the status of the policy changes. His own cell phone. When Raymond told me, I stared at the wall for a full 10 seconds. Then I said, "Ray, did I raise a criminal mastermind or a complete idiot?" Raymond said, "Brother, somehow incredibly both." They came on the 5th day carrying flowers. I want you to understand the specific audacity of that detail. They came to the hospital where my wife was recovering from what they had done to her, and they brought flowers, and they were wearing the expressions of 2 people who had decided that warmth and charm were their best remaining options. Derek came through the door first. He saw me standing in the corridor and immediately deployed a smile that did not reach his eyes by a considerable distance. He said, "Dad, how is she? We've been so worried." I looked at him, I looked at Amber, I looked back at him. I said, "She's awake, she's talking, she's going to make a full recovery." I watched something move behind his eyes. It was not relief. It was a fast, quiet recalculation, the look of a person whose plan has just failed and who is already working backward from that failure toward whatever comes next. Amber said, "That is such wonderful news, Warren." I said, "The police are on their way." Just like that, flat, even, the tone you might use to mention the forecast. Derek's color left his face with a speed that was almost medically remarkable. He said, "What?" I said, "Gloria Ashworth filed everything this morning. The pharmacy records, the toxicology report, the bank documentation, the call Derek made to the estate attorney from his personal cell phone, all of it. Every piece. In one package." Amber made a sound I had never heard from a human being before, something between a gasp and a collapse of posture. Derek said, "Dad, just listen to me for 1 second, okay? Just 1 second." I said, "Derek." He stopped. There is not a sentence that covers this. There is not a word in the English language that reaches where we are right now, so I need you to stop talking. I looked at the flowers in his hands. "Those are nice, though. Leave them at the desk. Someone will make sure your mother gets them from someone who hasn't been poisoning her for 4 months." They were arrested in the hospital parking lot. Gloria had timed it with the precision of a woman who understood completely that certain moments have visual significance that cannot be undone. They were still holding the flowers when the officers reached them. Derek attempted to talk through it. He has always believed that his voice is his most effective tool. Amber went very quiet in a way that suggested she was already calculating her options independently of him. Raymond appeared beside me at the window. I don't know when he arrived. He simply materialized the way he always does when something matters most, without announcement, without explanation, just there. We stood together and watched. He said, "How are you doing?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "Like I've aged 10 years in 5 days. Like I want to sleep for a month straight. Like I am the saddest I have ever been and the most certain about anything I have ever felt, simultaneously in the same body." He put his hand on my shoulder and left it there. I said, "She's going to be okay, Ray." He said, "I know she is." I looked back down the corridor toward Renata's room. Through the small window in her door I could see the shape of her, the soft light, the monitors doing their steady work. I said, "She married me. That's proof enough she can survive anything." Raymond laughed. A real one. It went all the way up to the ceiling and came back down, and for just a moment, just one moment, the weight in that corridor lifted completely. 3 months later, Renata came home. It was a Saturday in November, the kind of morning where the light comes through the front windows at an angle that makes everything look warmer than it is. She walked through the front door, stopped in the hallway, and spent a long moment looking at everything around her the way you look at things you nearly lost and are seeing for the first time with the full knowledge of what they're worth. Then she turned to me and said, "James, this living room needs new curtains." I said, "Those curtains are 2 years old." She said, "They've always been wrong. I was just being polite." I looked at the curtains. I looked at her. I pulled out my phone and started searching for curtain recommendations, and she made a sound of deep satisfaction and walked to the kitchen to make tea, and I stood there in my own hallway feeling something so large and so complete that I didn't have a name for it. She was home. She was Renata. Derek and Amber faced charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and financial fraud. Gloria Ashworth prosecuted with the energy of a woman who had been waiting a long time for a case she believed in this completely. The trial ran 9 days. The jury deliberated for under 4 hours. When the verdict was read, Renata was sitting beside me holding my hand with a grip that could have bent steel. When it was over, she leaned toward me and said, very quietly, "I want Thai food." I said, "Right now." She said, "James, I have been thinking about Thai food for 3 months. Do not make me ask twice." So we went. Raymond came. Gloria came. Dr. Akaffer, who Renata had apparently thoroughly charmed during her recovery because of course she had came. We sat around a table and we ate and we laughed, and I watched my wife gesture with both hands while telling a story, her voice filling the restaurant the way her voice fills every room it enters, and I thought, there she is. There's Renata. I said at the beginning of this story that I came home early and wished the house had been empty. I take that back. I am glad I came home. I am glad I turned into that driveway and felt what I felt and moved the way I moved. Because if the conference had run one more day, if I had stayed in Charlotte one more night, she wouldn't have made it. And I would have spent the rest of my life being told it was sudden, that no one saw it coming, that these things just happen. I am glad I came home. I wish my son had been the man I spent 28 years believing he was. But you cannot control what people choose to become in the dark. You can only control what you do when the lights come on. I came home. I turned the lights on. I made sure every person in that house faced exactly what they had done. That's the only job that ever mattered. If this story stayed with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to Dad's True Emotions. It's what keeps this channel going, and it genuinely means more than I can say. Leave a comment and tell me, have you ever come home to something that changed everything you thought you knew? Because I have a feeling some of you understand exactly what that moment feels like. See you in the next one.